Table of Contents, Part 2. Act 1, Arrest, Charges, and Trial. 1. The knock on the door, Damien Hardy's arrest. 2. The weight of the state, the indictment. 3. The People versus Hardy, the prosecution's case. 4. A defense mounted, arguments and counter-arguments. 5. The jury's verdict, conviction, and sentencing. The legal saga of Damien Hardy began not in a courtroom, but in the pre-dawn hours of an ordinary Tuesday. On April 16, 2013, a multi-agency task force executed a no-knock warrant at a modest two-story house in Brooklyn, New York. This was the culmination of a months-long investigation, codenamed Operation Gridlock, targeting a local gang suspected of drug trafficking and violent crimes. Neighbors were awakened by the sharp sound of a battering ram and the shouts of law enforcement officers. Inside, officers found and detained a surprised Damien Hardy, then 28 years old. The arrest was swift, executed with tactical precision, and marked the formal beginning of the state's case against him. The initial moments of the arrest were critical, and details from that morning would later be scrutinized by Hardy's legal team. According to the arresting officer's reports, Hardy was found in an upstairs bedroom. The search of the premises that followed was extensive. Law enforcement agents from the NYPD and the DEA methodically worked their way through the house. They cataloged every item they deemed to be potential evidence. This included 2 firearms found in a closet, a significant quantity of cash discovered in a safe, and several burner phones. These items, seized during the raid, would form the physical backbone of the prosecution's case against Hardy, linking him directly to the criminal activities under investigation by the task force. During the arrest, Hardy was read his Miranda rights, the standard warning given to criminal suspects in U.S. custody. This advisement informed suspects of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney. According to official records, Hardy invoked his right to an attorney and did not make any statements to the arresting officers. This decision would prove significant, as it prevented prosecutors from using any potential self-incriminating remarks against him. He was transported from his home to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York. There, he was formally booked and processed, his identity now logged into the vast machinery of the criminal justice system as he awaited his first court appearance. The arrest on April 16th was not an isolated event. It was part of a coordinated sweep that resulted in the apprehension of over a dozen other individuals connected to the same investigation. However, law enforcement officials quickly identified Hardy as a key figure. Leaked internal memos and subsequent press conferences by the district attorney's office painted him as a high-level operator within the targeted organization. This initial characterization by law enforcement would shape the public narrative and set the stage for the serious charges that were to follow. The quiet morning raid had shattered the normalcy of a residential street and thrust Damien Hardy into a legal battle that would define his life for years to come. Following his arrest, Damien Hardy was held in custody as prosecutors prepared their case. He was later transported to Brooklyn for prosecution in New York courts and in the EDNY federal case. The formal charging document, known as an indictment, was handed down by a grand jury on May 10, 2013. A grand jury is a group of citizens who hear preliminary evidence in private to decide if there is enough probable cause to proceed with a trial. This process is different from a trial jury, as it only hears the prosecution's side of the story. The indictment against Hardy was a lengthy document, spanning dozens of pages. It detailed a complex web of alleged criminal conduct, signaling the gravity of the legal challenge he was about to face. The state was not just accusing him of a single crime, it was alleging a pattern of organized criminal behavior. The indictment listed multiple felony counts against Damien Hardy. The most serious of these was the charge of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, specifically cocaine methamphetamine. This charge alleged that Hardy had worked with others to sell illegal drugs over a period of 2 years. Another major charge was possession of a firearm in furtherance of a drug trafficking crime, which carries a stiff mandatory minimum sentence. Additionally, counts included murder in aid of racketeering. Additionally, he was charged with several counts of money laundering, with prosecutors alleging he had used shell businesses to hide the profits from his illegal activities. Each charge represented a separate legal battle, and together, they carried the potential for a life sentence. Crucially, the indictment also included a charge under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The RICO Act is a powerful federal law originally designed to prosecute the mafia and other organized crime syndicates. Its inclusion in a state-level indictment against Hardy was a strategic move by the prosecution. A RICO charge allows prosecutors to link together seemingly unrelated crimes, drug sales, extortion, violence, as part of a single criminal enterprise. To prove this charge, the prosecution would need to show that Hardy was part of an ongoing criminal organization and had committed at least 2 predicate acts as part of its operations. This charge elevated the case from a standard drug and weapons bust to a major organized crime prosecution. The indictment was not just a list of charges, it was a narrative. It laid out the prosecution's theory of the case in meticulous detail. It named Hardy's alleged co-conspirators, described specific drug transactions with dates and locations, and traced the flow of money through various bank accounts. The document referenced wiretap recordings, surveillance photos, and testimony from confidential informants. It was a formidable roadmap of the evidence the state planned to present at trial. When Hardy and his newly appointed defense attorney received the indictment, they were confronted with the full scope of the government's case. The weight of the state was now formally and fully upon him. After the verdict, the focus narrowed to sentencing. The defense cited treatment notes, jail medications, and in-custody behavior. They asked for a psychological evaluation or mitigation credit. They pointed to consistent symptoms and medication compliance. They requested a professional assessment before sentencing. In the alternative, they asked the court to credit existing records as mitigation and structure care into the sentence. Hardy also offered to cooperate. Topics included routes, participants, and money. He raised safety concerns for himself and his family. Counsel requested consideration for substantial assistance. No binding agreement was reached. The prosecution countered that impairment was not shown. Counseling notes and jail prescriptions did not prove diminished capacity. On cooperation, they said there were no concrete results, no corroborated targets, no actionable outcomes. The court denied a new evaluation and a continuance. It credited mitigation only in part based on the records. The court found no basis for cooperation relief. No deal existed. Safety concerns were noted but did not justify a reduction. Reasons for sentence: serious counts, a mandatory firearm enhancement, deterrence, and community safety. Sentence imposed: 35 years to life, consecutive terms on specified counts, and the firearm enhancement. No cooperation reduction. With sentencing complete, the record closed and the case moved to appeal. A guilty verdict is not the end. It begins the post-trial fight, focused here on mental health filings and cooperation efforts. For Damien Hardy, that fight moved immediately to motions asking the trial court to revisit competency, evaluation, and potential sentence relief. Defense filed a motion for new trial and, in the alternative, post-conviction relief, alleging the record signaled competency concerns and requesting new psychological testing. Affidavits followed, one from a clinician summarizing prior symptoms and medication history, others from family describing confusion, withdrawal, and erratic sleep around trial. The legal standard is dusky: whether the defendant had a rational and factual understanding and could consult with counsel with a reasonable degree of rationality. Defense argued trial signs, flat affect, note-passing confusion, medication changes should have triggered deeper evaluation and a brief continuance for testing. They asked for fresh neuropsych and psychiatric exams, plus access to jail medical records to clarify medication compliance during trial. The prosecution opposed. Competence is presumed. The court observed Hardy. Existing evaluations were adequate. His in-court conduct showed understanding and communication. Defense also claimed ineffective assistance for not pursuing a fuller mental health defense, including additional experts and mitigation. Under Strickland, they argued counsel's omissions were unreasonable and prejudicial. Reasonable probability of a different outcome had testing and expert testimony been presented. In parallel, Hardy renewed proffer attempts after the verdict, through counsel, seeking sentence relief in exchange for information. Letters documented willingness to cooperate and raise safety concerns. Counsel requested a meeting under proffer protections. The state's response: sentence relief requires substantial, material, and verifiable assistance, names, corroborated events, or testimony that advances prosecutions. They said Hardy's offers fell short. At the post-trial hearing, both sides argued. Defense pressed Dusky and Strickland. The state emphasized the presumption of competence and lack of prejudice. Judge's findings: competency. No substantial evidence triggered a doubt. Observations showed Hardy tracking proceedings and conferring with counsel. Mental health evaluations. Prior screenings and records were adequate. Additional testing was not required. Requested continuance denied. Ineffective assistance. Under Strickland, even assuming deficient performance, no reasonable probability of a different verdict given the trial record. Cooperation. The court noted substantial assistance relief depends on concrete, corroborated help. The showing here was insufficient to justify any sentence modification. Rulings issued in writing. Motion for new trial, denied. Request for new psychological testing, denied. Continuance, denied. Ineffective assistance claim, denied under Strickland's two-part test. No deficient performance shown and no prejudice found. Cooperation-based relief, denied. The court found no material, verifiable assistance warranting a reduction. The court cited Dusky for competence, Strickland for counsel performance, and substantial assistance thresholds for sentence relief. Defense noted each denial on the record to preserve the issues for appeal. With those rulings, the post-trial chapter closed, and the case moved to the appellate courts where these preserved issues would be reviewed. The record now contained mental health filings and affidavits, requests for testing, Strickland claims, and cooperation correspondence, all denied. Those denials formed the backbone of Hardy's forthcoming appellate arguments. What the filings claimed, how the state answered, what the judge ruled, with citations, all preserved for review. In sum, competence not disturbed, no Strickland prejudice, no qualifying cooperation, motions denied. The next step would test those conclusions before a higher court. Appeal notices filed, briefing to come. The record, now complete, would speak. For Hardy, hope narrowed to what the documents could prove. And so, the appellate battle began. Section 1, the next arena, ascending to New York's appellate division. The appeal formally began with a notice of appeal, filed in the trial court, signaling Hardy's challenge to the judgment and sentence. Once filed, the clerk assembled the full record, transcripts, exhibits, and orders, setting the stage for briefing on the issues preserved below. The heart of the case would be the briefs, written arguments addressing competency and mental health, ineffective assistance tied to mental health investigation, the handling of evaluation requests, and how cooperation and proffer factored at sentencing. Setting the record straight, in the appellant's opening brief, Hardy's counsel argued the record raised bona fide doubts about competency, that trial counsel unreasonably failed to investigate and present mental health evidence, that the court erred by denying or limiting evaluations, and that post-verdict cooperation efforts were not properly credited at sentencing, claims they said undermined fairness. The brief previewed standards of review, abuse of discretion, and substantial evidence for competency and evaluation rulings, and Strickland's two-part test, deficient performance and prejudice, for ineffective assistance, with prejudice measured against a reasonable probability of a different result. Setting the record straight, the respondent's brief answered that Hardy participated coherently and understood proceedings, competency supported by substantial evidence. Counsel's mental health choices were reasonable strategy. Evaluation rulings were a proper exercise of discretion, and cooperation and proffer did not compel any further reduction or relief. The state stressed deference. Unless rulings were arbitrary, they stand. Setting the record straight on prejudice, even assuming deficiency, Hardy didn't show a reasonable probability of a different result. On sentencing, the court considered cooperation within the law and imposed a reasoned term. At oral argument before an appellate panel, counsel distilled these points: competency signals, mental health investigation scope, and handling of evaluations and cooperation within lawful bounds.
Counsel on ineffective assistance tied to mental health evidence. What in this record shows both deficient performance and a reasonable probability of a different outcome under Strickland.
And where juror fairness intersects with mental health issues, did the court's handling ensure a fundamentally fair process, or does the record suggest a need to revisit those safeguards?
The matter is submitted.
Behind closed doors, the panel weighed standards against facts, setting the record straight on what the record actually showed. They reviewed competency under substantial evidence, counsel's performance under Strickland, evaluation rulings for abuse of discretion, and sentencing treatment of cooperation, explicitly tethered to the record. The appellate division issued its opinion, majority with a dissent. Setting the record straight, the majority affirmed. The record demonstrated competency. Hardy understood and assisted. No abuse in evaluation handling. No Strickland prejudice from the mental health strategy. And no sentencing error tied to cooperation or proffer warranting relief. The dissent would have remanded on juror impartiality concerns about overall fairness, but did not dispute the majority on competency, mental health rulings, or cooperation outcomes, keeping the record's bottom line intact. Hardy sought review in the New York Court of Appeals. Leave was denied, leaving the appellate division's opinion intact and positioning any further relief in federal habeas in EDNY. As of May 24, 2024, Damien Hardy remains incarcerated, serving 35 years to life. His state conviction is final. The fight continues in the federal courts. Cooperation as a path to relief is effectively closed absent new and substantial assistance to authorities. His attorneys are preparing a federal habeas corpus petition focused on Sixth Amendment ineffective assistance regarding the development of mental health mitigation, and any due process claims tied to competency or evaluation issues. Next comes filing in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York. If denied, he can seek a certificate of appealability to the Second Circuit, and potentially petition the U.S. Supreme Court. The anticipated federal claims center on counsel's handling of mental health evidence, mitigation development, and fairness of evaluations, issues distinct from, but informed by, the state court record. Federal review is narrow. Under AEDPA, state decisions receive deference unless they unreasonably apply clearly established Supreme Court law or rest on unreasonable factual determinations. The process is slow and the odds are long. The record to date. The trial court's sentencing found mitigation and cooperation insufficient. Post-trial motions were denied. The appellate division affirmed, with a dissent noting juror impartiality concerns. The New York Court of Appeals denied leave. Our account is grounded in public records, filings, transcripts, and rulings, presented in chronological order. The enduring questions remain: what the law required, whether counsel met constitutional standards, and how courts evaluated mental health issues within the confines of the record. Ultimately, appellate review exists to test one case against settled rules and constitutional guarantees, and to ask, was justice done? For now, Hardy's status is unchanged, incarcerated, with federal habeas claims pending or anticipated, and no cooperation relief, absent new substantial assistance.
If you want to know more about the true stories behind New York's most notorious gangs, hit that subscribe button, because in the world of true crime, the truth is never simple, and it's never safe.